It is the Sengoku Jidai. Besieged and surrounded by his enemies, a lord pays a group of men to see his only child to safety. But do they have the skill to ensure her safety? And can they even be trusted? For this is an age of honor and treachery, of blood and valor, of gold and steel. Now available at Amazon, Smashwords, and at studiobrainstorm.net. Links in the description. According to legend, Joseph of Arimathea, the man responsible for burying the body of Christ after he was taken down from the cross, somehow managed to travel all the way to England in the 1st century, carrying with him the very crown of thorns that Christ had worn upon the cross. From said crown sprouted immense thorn bushes. It was upon this site that the Abbey of the Sacred Crown would later be built in the 12th century, and it is from the thorn bushes that the English village of Thorns would get its name. It was on this spot, in late October of 1493, 98 years after the commencement of the Anarch Revolt, that the warring sides of vampire kind met to try and hammer out a peace. Security and safety for all participants was guaranteed by Father Samuel, the Toreador Prince of Southampton, in whose territory the Abbey of the Sacred Crown resided. Eleanor de Valois of Clan Bruja was chosen as mediator. She was one of the few trusted by both sides to be fair and impartial, despite the fact that she was the child of Adana de Sforza, one of the Camarilla's founders. Of course, de Sforza herself was present, along with the other founders of the Camarilla, such as Hardestat and de Corazon, as well as the first 4 Camarilla archons, Gilbert d'Arfleur of the Ventru, his cousin, Father Jean-Marc d'Arfleur of the Toreador, Federico de Padua of the Nosferatu, and Lilica Kairos of the Bruja. As for the Anarchs, while their number boasted many from all the clans of Europe, they had been predominantly consisted of the younger Ancilean neonates of the Bruja, as well as the majority of clans La Sombra and Tzimisce. As such, the Anarchs were represented by 3. Tyler for the Bruja, Micah Vikos of the Tzimisce, and Gabriel Baruch of the La Sombra. The Assamites, as allies of the Anarchs, had 4 representatives, though only 3 are named, and all are presumed to have been of the warrior caste: Hussein al-Fatin, Karif al-Numair, and Antara ibn Shaddad ibn Amr, the so-called Shepherd of Wolves. There are no exact numbers, but the total number of the attendees at the Convention of Thorns are reckoned to have been at least over 50 vampires, not counting, of course, their attendant ghouls and other retainers. De Valois opened the convention in the evening of October the 18th. She introduced all those delegates present by name and by clan, and then read out the issues that were to be discussed for the rest of the evening among the delegates themselves. There were a total of 3 issues to be discussed that evening, and they kind of show just what a position of strength the nascent Camarilla had at this point, reminding ourselves that they were effectively winning the conflict with the Anarchs and the Assamites. 1. Should a general amnesty be granted to those whose actions led others astray, or should the leaders surrender themselves to the judgment of the Camarilla's founders and their archons? 2. Should Clan Assamite remain independent of the Camarilla and refuse to subject themselves to its rulings? If they do remain apart, how may we ensure that their practices pose no future threat to us? 3. Should this current system of governance, Justicars and Archons, continue? Shall the current holders of those positions remain in office? If not, who will be the new Justicars? How will we select the future Justicars, and what will be their duties and responsibilities? Will we appoint a council to oversee the Justicars, or shall those justices serve as the highest authority of the Camarilla? Those Justicars, incidentally, were the 7 founders, like Hardestat. And the last issue of discussion in particular shows just how confident they were of victory and how they were already looking to the future. Counting that first night, the Convention of Thorns lasted a total of 6 evenings. Many opinions would be expressed concerning the issues of discussion over the course of those evenings. They were not even-tempered discussions. Although the Camarilla were not unwilling to make some small concessions to the Anarchs provided they accepted the terms of the peace, It was very clear that they very much wanted unconditional capitulation, and the Anarchs deeply resented that. "I came here to negotiate, not surrender," were the words of Gabriel Baruch, the La Sombra representative of the Anarchs. His was the most polite disagreement. On the night of October 19th, Nika Vikos of the Tzimitzi Anarchs got into a heated debate with Ventru Hardestat the Younger. Vikos passionately argued that the Anarchs had been totally justified in all they'd done, and that vampires deserved to live free from the iron-fisted rule of the Elders. Hardestat, of course, countered with the fact that most of the Anarchs had done very little with their newfound freedom except to run hog wild and commit atrocities upon the kine, which of course is the reason why so many Anarchs ended up being killed by the Shadow Inquisition. This alone, in his eyes, justified the idea that power should remain in the hands of those old enough and wise enough to use it well. As the night wore on, the argument grew increasingly ugly, until at last, Vikos, in a blind rage, ripped off his own genitals and flung them in the Ventru's face. Unsurprisingly, though, the most violent objection to the Camarilla's demands came from Tyler on October the 20th, when, in the middle of yet another angry debate between the Anarchs and the Elders, she burst in with black powder pistols and attempted to assassinate Hardestat himself. The attempt failed, and she was forced to flee into the night. The Banu Hakim representatives made their own case over the course of the convention and found the bulk of opposition to them coming from the Tremere. Over the course of the Anarch revolt, the Tremere, for reasons of their own, had gone to great lengths to smear the Assamites as unrepentant diablerists, eventually going so far as to persuade the newly made Camarilla to declare a blood hunt upon the entire clan, the first and only time in vampiric history that an entire bloodline had been marked for destruction. Mistress Fanchon and the other Tremere began calling for the Camarilla to criminalize diablerie, which, as the Anarchs were quick to point out, was pretty rich coming from a clan whose rise to power had been precisely through the act of diablerie. No one was likely to forget the exact nature of how Clan Salubri had met its demise. The Anarchs were also quick to remind the Camarilla of how they'd turned a blind eye to the Giovannis supplanting the Cappadocians out of pragmatism. At one point during the night of October 21st, several senior Tremere, led by the fourth generation Etrius, excused themselves from the meeting, but wouldn't say why. Meanwhile, the importance of enforcing the masquerade was championed by Raphael de Corazon and the Malkavian Methuselah Unmada. They in turn were opposed by the Ravnos elder Durga Sin, who warned that a third way must be found, lest the humans one day discover they were being manipulated by vampires and respond with even greater fury and resentment. But at last, on the night of October the 22nd, 1493, the final arguments were made, the votes were cast, and the Treaty of the Convention of Thorns was drafted. The following night, all gathered to hear the treaty being read out to them by Eleanor de Valois. Many years have passed since the start of our current conflict, now called the Anarch movement. Be it known that on this night of 23 October 1493, the jihad has ended. The time for self-destruction is over. This convention, bound in the Covenant of Cain by sacred vow, represents an unyielding, vigilant truce between the kindred known unto themselves as the Anarchs, the clan Assamite, and the freestanding kindred bound under the title of Camarilla. Henceforth, the parties shall be recognized by faction as the Anarchs, the Assamites, and the Camarilla. Each of the parties agrees to the responsibility of maintaining peace. Each shall lay its censure upon any who breach or oppose this sacred agreement. Accounting will be made of all parties for violations by them to either the letter or the spirit of this agreement. This document is legally binding under the accepted Lex Leonis of all Cainites as it has passed through the ages. All kindred are entreated to accept and gain pleasure from this peaceful accord. Be it known that the Anarchs will enjoin with the Camarilla as an accepted part, making it whole. Anarchs are expected to work peacefully to achieve their own ends. They must become defenders of all, and they shall receive full entitlement to all rights and privileges belonging to all Camarilla kindred. All Anarchs shall be accepted back unto their elders and their formerly denounced clans without any fear of reprisal. Only the most vicious of atrocities shall not be forgiven. These shall stand written for the Justicars to hear within 1 year, after which all allegations are no longer valid. All Anarchs shall reclaim all remaining and rightful property confiscated from them. In return, they must turn over any war gains taken during the conflict by giving them to their sires or any recognized clan elder. Know also that if the Anarchs are further warred upon, this open jihad invalidates their responsibility to maintain peace with their attacker. They may act freely without fear of reprisal from non-active members of the Camarilla. Anarchs are guaranteed the freedom to act as they please, short of breaching the masquerade imposed for the protection of all kindred from the Kine. It is also noted that any member of any other self-proclaimed sect must openly declare this before his elders and renounce this relation. Failure to do so will result in the destruction of any deemed guilty. No kindred may be sent unknowingly to his death by any elder or sire, unless the security of the clan or Camarilla outweigh the possible loss of unlife. From this night forward, the Assamites shall henceforth no longer commit diablerie upon members of other clans. The Assamites must commit themselves to this acceptance by a mark of assurance placed upon them in the form of a thaumaturgical limitation. All members of the Assamites shall become unable to drink freely of the vitae of other kindred from now unto forever. In addition, the Assamites shall pay to the Bruja elders of Spain 2,000 pounds of gold in ransom of the 5 Assamite elders captured committing diablerie. Also, the Assamites may no longer participate in blood hunts. Be it also known, the Assamites are guaranteed complete independence from Camarilla demands. The Assamite fortress Alamut shall be free from any further assaults. Assamites are also granted, out of respect for their beliefs, the freedom to commit diablerie within their own clan without restraint and the right to commit diablerie upon all kindred not recognized as holding membership within the Camarilla. It is rendered that all parties involved and all showing allegiance to any of these parties shall be held responsible for all aspects of this convention brought forth here, in the neutral kingdom of England, outside the hamlet of Thorns, near the town of Silchester. May Cain hold truth and peace for us all. The reception of the treaty was mixed, to put it kindly. The Camarilla delegates were happy because it pretty much gave them everything they wanted with very little cost to themselves. The Anarchs weren't exactly thrilled with the idea of accepting the authority of the elders again. However, the offer of amnesty was a tempting one. Lest we forget, the Anarchs were losing the war by the time of the convention, so they felt that this might be the best deal they were going to get. As such, many Anarchs, including the youngsters of Clan Bruja, signed the treaty and were welcomed back into the fold. The Tzimitzi La Sombra Anarchs had a more negative reaction to the treaty, but that will have to wait for the Sabbat video. Naturally, the Assamites were in no ways open to the idea of submitting to whatever thaumaturgical nonsense the Tremere had cooked up for them, and refused to sign. So, while the Anarch Revolt technically ended on the 22nd of October of 1493, the fighting would continue for a few years more, only this time solely between the Camarilla and the Banu Hakim. Given that the Banu Hakim boast the greatest combat prowess of all vampires, there's no telling how much longer the fighting would have dragged on if one day in late 1495 an unnamed Nosferatu scout discovered a secret way inside of the Assamites' most important fortress, Alamut. The fact that the clan headquarters was now potentially open to enemy incursion actually intimidated the elders of the clan sufficiently to sue for peace. And at last, in 1496, the clan Assamite signed the Treaty of Tyre. In exchange for the Camarilla calling off the blood hunt, the clan agreed to submit to the terms of the Convention of Thorns, including the thaumaturgical spell placed on most of the clan by the Tremere. This thaumaturgical act rendered the blood of all Camarilla-aligned vampires lethal to the Assamites, meaning that they could no longer diablerize even the lowliest member of the Camarilla. At least not so long as they valued their unlives, that is. In 1504, the first official meeting of the Camarilla since Thorns was held in Vienna, Austria. There, after a great deal of backroom deals and making of promises and favors, the 7 founders were able to gain enough support to have them proclaimed the first iteration of the Inner Circle, the overall global leaders of vampire society. They each appointed a vampire from their own clan to succeed them in the role of Justicar, and thus has the Camarilla functioned ever since. The last loose end was tied in 1528, when the clan Giovanni and the Camarilla agreed to a non-interference pact known as the Promise of 1528. From the Dark Ages to the modern nights, the Camarilla has existed as the most powerful of all the vampire sects. The Inner Circle claim to be the rightful leaders of all vampiric society, and though the Sabbat, Anarchs, and independent clans mostly discount this, it is only a foolish Cainite who completely ignores what the Camarilla does. They're not the good guys. No one in Vampire the Masquerade can be considered a good guy, with the possible exception of Saulot, but that's another story. Going by the old D&D morality scale, the Camarilla would definitely fall into the category of lawful evil. As one might expect from a faction that was founded by elders trying to hang on to their power and preeminence, the Camarilla is a very rigid hierarchy. Your chances for advancement are very low except by the most underhanded of schemes, which require a lot of patience, things that younger vampires have a hard time doing because they've yet to internalize the fact that they literally have eternity to pull it off. Of course, being undead means there's no turnover, and elders guard their power jealously, and they have the power to squash anyone that they think might be trying to mess with them. Organization-wise, the Camarilla is divided into roughly 2 tiers: global organization and local organization. At the tippity top, of course, is the Inner Circle, a ruling council whose members, with the exception of the original founders, have gone to great lengths to successfully conceal their identity so that no one within the Camarilla knows who they are. All that is known for certain is that they are always the most powerful members of the organization, and that they meet once every 13 years to discuss and/or enact worldwide Camarilla policy. Usually in Venice, but they can set up anywhere if it suits their purposes. Because of its remote secrecy and its unquestioned authority, many refer to the Inner Circle as the Ivory Tower. One rung down from the Inner Circle are the Justicars. Like the Inner Circle, there are only as many Justicars as there are member clans, one for each clan. To sum up, the Justicars are essentially the global vampire equivalent of a judiciary, an intelligence gathering service, and brutal secret police all rolled into one. Assisted by dozens, if not hundreds, of hand-picked subordinates known as Archons, the Justicars' primary purpose is to root out anyone who might potentially violate the Masquerade and threaten the existence of vampire kind as a whole. Generally, this responsibility is left to the princes of the individual Camarilla domains, but the Justicars believe in being not only thorough, but preemptive. The world is vast, and even by delegating much of the work to the Archons, the Justicars know full well that it could be all too easy for a vampire to expose their entire existence to the kind and bring about their own annihilation. As such, the Justicars believe that the best thing they can do is to prevent such things from ever happening, and the best way to prevent that, they feel, is the use of fear and intimidation. Everyone knows that the Justicars are the hands, the eyes, and the mouthpiece of the Inner Circle. They hold ultimate authority second to the Ivory Tower itself, and they wield the power of unlife and final death over every Camarilla vampire. As stated previously, law and order is mostly left to the local leadership. The global powers that be only intervene when they think said local leadership is not up to the task, which usually does not bode well for said leadership. When an Archon shows up in a domain, the Prince, the Primogen Council, and pretty much anyone in a position of local authority starts to sweat. But if it's a Justicar that's sent to the area, expect a multitude of soiled undergarments. That's how much fear the Justicars command. In terms of local leadership, the ruler of a domain always holds the title of Prince, regardless of sex. Barring intervention by the global authorities that be, a prince is the ultimate authority within a domain. A domain is usually a city. Humans packed there in more numbers, which means more food. Hence, more blood to go around, hence more vampires. Plus, there's the fact that things like werewolves lurk in the countryside and tend to kill vampires on sight. So, vampires are very rarely found in rural areas of the world. To the prince falls such responsibilities as allocating hunting grounds to the various prominent vampires within his or her domain, granting permission to those who wish to sire new vampires. He or she is also in charge of punishing those who violate the traditions, especially the Masquerade, and only the prince has the authority to call a blood hunt upon malefactors who are currently at large. To have a blood hunt called upon you means that you have lost any rights and protections as a Camarilla vampire, and all other kindred in the area are given free rein to hunt your sorry ass down. Another important responsibility of the prince is the declaration or revocation of Elysium. Conflict is the natural state of affairs in vampiric society, but there are times where even the undead need to take a break from all the backbiting and scheming and murdering. This is the purpose of Elysium, a neutral area chosen by the prince where all members of the vampiric domain can gather in peace. Violence is strictly verboten. To be chosen by the prince to be the keeper of Elysium, the one in charge of overseeing the venue and making sure the rules are abided by, is a great honor, if mostly symbolic, but also a heavy responsibility. Things go wrong at an Elysium, the prince is likely to hold you responsible. Second to the prince is the seneschal, and there really isn't much else to say about the office, as the seneschal just does the things that the prince either can't or won't do, whether because he's simply not interested or is otherwise indisposed. Another office in charge of maintaining law and order in a domain is the sheriff. Usually selected by the prince and or the Primogen Council, the sheriff is charged with investigating potential crimes and bringing them to the attention of the prince for summary judgment. A similar office is that of the Scourge, which is similar to a sheriff but is far more violent and militant. A sheriff is sort of like your regular law enforcement officer. A Scourge and its coterie are more like a SWAT team, as they are the ones charged specifically with eliminating those who have transgressed against the traditions, but are not so severe as to justify a blood hunt. Not an official position, but definitely one to take note of, is the Harpy. Chief opinion maker and chief trendsetter, as well as the center of gossip and innuendo all rolled into one, the Harpy is a very vague office but can definitely wield a lot of unofficial social influence. Given the flamboyant nature of the office, unsurprisingly, the vast majority of Harpies tend to be from the Toreador clan. Although the prince is technically the highest authority in a domain, there is also the matter of the Primogen Council, comprised of one representative from each of the clans that live within the city that comprises that domain. The Primogens technically are supposed to function as advisors to the prince. However, there is always a big difference between theory and practice. And that's kind of why the descriptions of the various offices in a domain have been kind of vague in this video. This is once again down to White Wolf wanting to maximize freedom of both the players and the game master. Yes, there are technically defined roles and powers belonging to the various office holders in a domain, but more than anything else, an office is defined by the power and personality of the office holder. Sure, in a city with a strong and confident prince, the Primogen Council does indeed act as a mere advisory board. But in another city where a prince might be weak, the Primogens are the true authority, and the prince is little more than their mouthpiece. Any vampire lucky enough, smart enough, or skilled enough to rise the ranks and achieve office within a domain, you will find that the exact nature of your power and responsibility within a given office are dependent on you and how you interact with the other office holders of that domain. More important than organization, though, are certain key beliefs that set the Camarilla apart from the Sabbat and the Anarchs, and I don't just mean obedience to the elders here. The first is a desire to distance themselves from the supposed semi-mythic origin of vampires. As such, where the Sabbat retained the term Cainite to refer to vampires, the Camarilla have adopted the term kindred. Not only do they deny the existence of the antediluvians, they also discourage and even punish those who dare to speak of Gehenna, the supposed upcoming apocalypse of the undead, where Cain shall one day return to pass final judgment upon all his childer. Why exactly they've decided to do this is unknown. And then there is the matter of the vampire's relationship with their inner beast. Over the millennia, there have been many different ways of reconciling oneself to the savage monster that lurks within their undead hearts. But after the Convention of Thorns, the Camarilla chose to embrace and enforce only one: the path of humanity. After its founding, the Camarilla proceeded to carry out Hardestat's plan and wove a vast conspiracy convincing all of the kind that vampires no longer existed, and it had the desired effect. With all of its members now obeying new rigid rules for concealment, and with no longer any obvious threats to combat, the Shadow Inquisition effectively lost its reason for being and effectively faded away, though a few small remnants like the Society of Leopold would carry on in a limited capacity into the modern Knights. But the Camarilla does not merely encourage concealing the existence of vampires from humans, but they will also go out of their way to make sure that no undue harm by the undead is inflicted upon the local population. This is purely out of pragmatism, lest the masquerade be completely undone and humanity rediscover the existence of the undead. However, there is another side to this. Elders often encourage the younger members of their clans to interact with the human herd as much as possible without giving themselves away. Having joined the ranks of the undead, a neonate is completely cut off from former friends and family and can no longer interact with them lest the masquerade be violated. And yet, elders believe that regular contact with the kind not only teaches younger vampires to hide more effectively among them and thus maintain the masquerade, but it is also believed that continued exposure to humans and human behavior will help vampires hold on to their humanity, which the Camarilla believe is the only effective means of keeping the beast at bay. However, such concerns may seem increasingly pedestrian given the events of recent nights. Both clans Brujah and Clan Gangrel have defected from the Camarilla to the Anarch movement. A second Inquisition is on the rise. Plus, the numbers of clanless caitiff vampires and thin bloods have increased dramatically, which only stokes fears among the more superstitious that perhaps the end of the world is indeed upon them. But it's not all bad news for the Ivory Tower, as large numbers of Clan La Sombra and Clan Banu Hakim have requested membership in recent nights, partially making up for the losses of the Gangrel and the Brujah. As to whether or not the Camarilla can weather the storm that seems to be on the horizon, well, that's in the hands of Paradox Interactive at this point. For now, the time has come to part ways until the next video on the Camarilla's ancient enemy, the Sabbat.